Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of PodSaveChocolate. I'm your host, Clay Gordon. I'm also the publisher, moderator, chief everything officer over at thechocolatelife.com. I have been writing about chocolate professionally for more than 20 years, and I have been a part of some very, very interesting names from early phases as well as late stages in some of the smallest and some of the biggest chocolate makers in the world. And today, what I want to do is I want to share with you some advice about starting up, top tips about starting up a craft chocolate business. And before we begin, two things. Number one is no matter where you're connecting from, where you're watching from in the world, please go into the comments and let me know where you're connecting from. Not YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, but physically what part of the world you're connecting from. And also, if you have comments or questions, you can go into the live chat on YouTube or in the comments in Facebook and LinkedIn, and you can post your questions there. And I'll get all that up on the screen. If you do a shout out about where you're from, I'll get that out of the screen. If you've got a comment or question, I'll get it up on screen. And I'll try to get all of those asked and answered over the course of the next hour. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now, and every episode of Pod Save Chocolate is sponsored by all of the members of the Chocolate Life. So you can go there, click on this green button in the top right corner. It'll say join if you're not logged in, or sign up if you're not logged in, and then become. There's always a free membership. And then while you're watching, like this video and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And with all that, let's go to the post for today's episode. And I do create an individual post for every episode where I can put what it is that I plan to do, and then link to resources in on the page, so that you don't have to pay really, really close attention to what websites I'm visiting and stuff like that. You'll be able to find them on the page. And so here's the page for today's post. And before I jump right into it, I just want to do a quick shout out to Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce in Kittredge, Colorado. I'm glad that you could join us this morning. And I do want to let people know that when you become a member of the Chocolate Life, I hold member AMA calls as just one of the benefits of membership. And so once a month, it's Sunday after Sunday, usually the third Sunday of the month, I spend 90 minutes where we can get on a call and you can ask me anything you want. Right. I want to say that, I've gotten to know Mark quite well over the course of his membership, because he takes advantage of these once a month calls. So just a quick shout out to Mark for his support. And the fact that he takes advantage of the benefits of membership. So thanks for that. All right. So with that, what I want to do is I want to go and set the stage for this overview. I've spent probably more time than is good for my mental health over on Reddit, and mostly in the r/chocolate subreddit. And it's interesting to me because it gives me a view into chocolate that I don't hear from a lot of people who are in the chocolate world, which is really, really cool. So these are just, people who like chocolate, and there are discussions. There are some really well-known names and people who are very experienced who participate in r/chocolate. But a couple of days ago, a gentleman by the name of Josh, he's since reached out to me, posted this question. He's starting up a small craft chocolate business. I recently started making small batch chocolate from beans, right? And wants to hear from people that have had success starting a bean to bar company, right? What tips would you offer to someone who's just starting up? And I took this very, very seriously, right? Request very, very seriously. And I answered with a bunch of things. And I was thinking about this as I was writing things down. Ooh, this is a good topic for an episode, which is where we are today. Now, I want to also point out and be very, very clear that my choice of this particular image for today's episode is not to be taken as good advice. The text on this image, in case you can't see it, says, "Let your intuition guide you. You are what you've been looking for." And my number one point that I would make, which is not on the list, by the way, is you can't just let your intuition guide you. If you just let your intuition guide you, you are going to fail. Right? And with that out of the way, what I want to I'll go through the points right? That I have put on my list today. Now, most of these, I added one this morning just before the episode started. Most of these been up for a day or so. And so if you've had a chance to read them, please go read them. By the way, this is a toggle. If you just click on this, it'll expand. So if you just thought these were headlines that didn't actually see the little arrow on the right-hand side, this is it. Okay, so these are in some particular order. They're not necessarily in rank order. So this is not the most important tip. This is not a rank ordered list. So number one, define success. Right? You need to understand from the beginning, if you're going to start a business, what success means for you. Now, for example, you might be in a second career or a third career. You might be retired. You're looking for a hobby business. You're looking for something to keep you active, keep you occupied. That's a lot of fun and gives you an opportunity to connect with a lot of people, in the process of sharing your chocolate with them. So the success for you is something that, if you're in retirement, you're on a limited income, maybe it's something that doesn't lose money, right? And success for you is something that, again, will keep you occupied for a number of years, right? Maybe one thing you'd like to do with your success is you have some children and you'd like to build a business that you would like to pass on to them, right? Assuming that you have children who want to follow in your footsteps. That's another thing. Or, if you're much younger and you don't have children yet, and you are, but want to have children, you need to think about, okay, what am I going to do that is going to enable me to put my children or help put my children through college? You need to define what success is for you. So it may be, I want to start out this business. In 5 years, I'm going to create something I can sell, right? That's an exit strategy. And then you need to be very, very careful, all right, about defining what success is, right? You also need to have a budget. How much money do I have to spend? What can I afford to lose in case this all goes bad? So starting a business is a gamble in one sort or another. What can I afford to lose? And then you need to keep track of how much it is actually costing you to do stuff. You need to understand your true cost of production, because you don't know what you need to sell something for if you don't actually know what it costs you to make. And so as a part of that understanding, what you need to know is, even if you're not paying yourself a salary when you start off, you need to know what the burden costs. So you need to add the amount of money you would pay somebody to do what you're doing, right, into your cost calculations. Now, I was, my business before, my career before getting into chocolate was in high technology. And I was in New York City in the mid 1990s working in new media and social media, the internet and things like that. And we had a joke running around among many of us. I helped co-found one of the first advertising and interactive ad rep firms. And I had a lot of friends in internet startups. And we would joke that, how do you make how do you make a small fortune in the internet? You start off with a big one. And I would say that to people who are starting out. How do you make a small fortune in chocolate? You start off with a big fortune. You need to be very, very careful about the money that you have, the money that you spend. You need to understand all of these things. And along with that, out of that, how do I define success? How does my money, what kind of money do I have, the cost of production? What you need to do is you need to put together some sort of plan. Now, it doesn't have to be a formal business plan, right? It just can be some sort of narrative that says, here are my goals, here are what it is that I want to do, right? And you need to go and revisit that on a regular basis, right? You put something out into the market says, I really, really love it. You put something out in the market says, I really, really hate it, right? Your business plan, and not just the spreadsheet, not just the financials associated with the plan, is a living, breathing document. You need to revisit it, and you need to be prepared to change your idea of what it is that you're doing, right, based upon the way the market reacts to what you're doing. That's very, very different. If you go to investors and you're constantly changing your mind based on what they tell you they want, they will have no respect for you. That's not what I'm talking about. right? What you need to do is you need to know, here's what I am trying to do. Here's what I'm trying to make. Here's the reason why you want to invest in me, or here's the reason why I'm investing in this business, right? And if you have outside investors, especially ones who are not family members, they may say, just pay me back. But if you do have outside investors, you need to say, okay, within 3 to 5 years, I'm going to give you all your money back. And then you need to present them with a plan for how that's going to happen. Oh, we're going to do that because I'm going to go to 20 million in sales and I'm going to sell the business. That is an exit strategy. I don't know how realistic it is. There aren't many examples of it, right? So it's really, really important. First thing off, right, as part of starting up your craft chocolate business, define what you mean by success. Now, this next one, think local, is not, again, it's not the next most important thing. It is an important thing. I have seen a lot of small chocolate businesses fail or crack under the strain of trying to go too big, too fast. Right. So many people think, oh, my biggest goal is to get into Whole Foods. And this was before Amazon bought them and changed everything about the dynamics there. But I will be successful if I'm in Whole Foods, or I will be successful if I'm in, Erewhon or Sprouts. I mean, that's how I'm going to define success based on, where people will be able to find my product. Costco, right? When you're starting out, what I suggest you do is you think of your chocolate business the way a craft brewer or microbrewer is going to be thinking about their business. In the world of beer, distribution can be very, very expensive because of licensing and regulation around alcohol. And it differs from state to state. But in general, if I'm a startup craft brewer, what I'm thinking about distribution within about an hour's drive, maybe a 2-hour drive from where I'm manufacturing. And what I want to do as a part of that is I want to build up a base of support within that area that I can reasonably service, right, myself. Right. And that's what I want to focus on. And I don't want to think about expanding retail locations or expanding into wholesale distribution or expanding into all of these other forms of growing my business. Right. Before I have a firm support, I know that I can count on X amount a month cash flow from sales, right, in the local community, however you want to define it. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't sell online and ship. But it's really, really important when you start shipping is you need to understand what that means, right? Getting something into either USPS, UPS, FedEx on a regular basis, and committing to what does it take to actually wrap something, right? So it will arrive intact. I mean, when you're in the chocolate business and you're filling online, you're also in the shipping business, and you need to understand what getting into the shipping business entails. Right. And I can tell you that when you have 20 more orders than you can possibly pack, 2 days before the deadline for getting something into the mail or into the post or however you're shipping it, so that it will arrive before Christmas. Right. And it means that you're up until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, right, doing nothing but getting these boxes wrapped. You understand that if you're fulfilling online orders, right, you are in the shipping business. And what does it mean to be in the shipping business? Right. So go ahead and do that. Right. And if you're going to do it, one of the biggest tips I have for that, if you're shipping USPS, right, specifically, but it also is UPS and FedEx, is get to know everybody at your local post office. Right. They should know you on a first name basis, right? Your UPS driver, get to know that person on a first name basis. If you go to the depot and drop off the depot, get to know these people on a first name basis. When I was shipping chocolate, and this is up in Westchester, New York, I knew from speaking with the people at the front counter when the back door closed. I knew even though the front counter closed at 5 o'clock, I knew that I had until 6:30 or 7 o'clock before the priority mail, right, truck left to go to the distribution center. And these guys and women, everybody there, colloquially, knew who I was And I had tacit permission from the postmaster, to drive around to the back in places where people are not normally allowed to go, right? And it made all the difference. That extra hour, not having to go to the front counter and not knowing that there might be 10 people in line in front of me, right? But being able to go to the back and just dropping things off and being able to, say, hey, Mike, and hello, and all that kind of stuff. It even got to the point where I would do is my local letter carrier, when I had a box of chocolate, I'd say, ooh, a box of chocolate for me, and ask them if they liked chocolate, right? And yes, ooh, can I share you something? They're not supposed to take tips of any sort, but sharing a bit of chocolate is usually a good thing. That's one of the points, right? If you're going to do this, right, get to know the people that you're working with. Listen, I moved out of the little town in Westchester, Larchmont, where I lived for 20 some odd years. And was away in Brooklyn for a couple of years. And I went back to my post office, and the people still knew who I was. Hey, Mr. Chocolate Man, how's things going? I cannot tell you how valuable that is, right? You need to cultivate those relationships. You need to do those things, right? You need to understand, right, the local market and get their support before you can do it. Now, again, if business comes in over the transom, if business comes in via the website, don't turn down that business, right? But think very, very carefully if what it means is, I need to figure out how I'm going to provide support for a retail location that is 4 hours away, right? That I can't get to easily. Or I need to find support for a wholesaler who's got a warehouse, 4 states away. If you start doing that before you have that local base of support, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to run the risk. I don't know that you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be able to run the risk that all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I have a customer demand, right, that I'm not going to be able to meet, right? And whether that's a customer service request or it's actually an order, right? If you're going to go into wholesale, you need to know that you're going to be able to meet production demands of your customers. So if you start not being able to ship on time or short ship, right, or any of these sorts of things, it can be death to the brand. And I can tell you that one of the challenges that the Math brothers had, the original incarnation, had towards the very end, is they were short shipping their customers, right? And so somebody would call up and place an order. I mean, and this is an established business. They've been around for a long time, right? They couldn't manage that. And so as a startup business, you need to be really careful about that then. All right. So think local number 2, inspiration. The last thing the world needs, the last thing the craft chocolate world needs is another 70% 2-ingredient, made in Melanger from Bajofo estate beans in Madagascar. Right? That's the last thing we need. There are hundreds of those bars out there, even 3-ingredient bars. And while there is a lot of expectation that you need to produce chocolate from the greatest hits of producing countries. So you need to have an Ecuador, you need to have a Venezuela, you need to have a Trinidad, because these are where all the best beans come from. I would argue that's not the way to think about it, right? What you need to do is you need to think about, there are 19 other Bajofo estates. So this is Bertialakison from Madagascar. There are 19 other Bajofo estate bars out there. What am I going to do that's different from what everybody else is doing, right? That's part of it. Now, because your customers don't exist in a vacuum, right? If customers are coming to you for single origin chocolates, they're going to be aware of other single origin makers. They're going to be other bars that are like yours, and people are going to compare them to what you're doing, right? So think about what other people are doing, and I'll get to that in more detail at another point. And before I do, quick shout out to Mike King at Encore Coffee in Kansas City. Hey, Mike, Good to talk to you. And I want to let you know, Mike, that the guy who posted this says he has some sort of third wave coffee business in Colorado. So I don't know if he's a roaster, but he's got some. It's associated with a coffee business in Colorado. Um, just um, a little side note there. Um, so number one. So all right. Number one is you have to make stuff. And let's go to this next point, which is taste your competition, right? All right, so I'm talking about think local, number two, inspiration, and taste your competition at the same time. Is that while it is really important that you make chocolate that you're happy with, right? You also need to make chocolate that your customers are going to want, right? Yeah. Now, it turns out that having a chocolate that people want to buy a lot of on a regular basis, right, is a good thing for you. You need to have what we call cash cows, right? You can't fall on your sword, for want of a better term. It's like for everything that you do. There are things that you need to do that should be just, oh my gosh, I want to eat this and I want to eat a lot of it. Right? You need those things because what they will do is they will fund your passion projects. Everything can't be a passion project, which is another way of saying you can't fall on your sword for everything. Not everything can be a passion project. All right. So, I just got done judging the Craft Chocolate Challenge uh, earlier this week. 67 entries this year in 4 categories, with entries from more than a dozen countries this year. And one of the things that I took away from this is that there's a lot of creativity when it comes to flavors and inclusions, right? And I would say that almost entirely across the board, it is the bars that had some sort of flavoring or some sort of inclusion are the ones that I rated the highest. If I'm just doing a straight 2-ingredient chocolate bar, it really has to stand out. I mean, it really has to be spectacular in order to stand out with all these other things. And you also, you might think about them in very, very different. As a judge, I think about them in different kinds of ways, right? But if I'm sitting in Georgia, right, why am I not doing something with peaches, right? Or if I'm down in Alabama, why am I not doing something with pecans? Or think about local ingredients and local flavors. What is the state food? What is the state fruit? You go to the local state fair and find out what people are doing at the state fair or aren't doing at the state fair. Right? Think about local inspiration for products, not just chocolate that is unflavored, just 2, 3 ingredient. Maybe you have less of them, maybe you don't. Salt is a really good thing just to refine in, not as a sprinkle on the back or to add as a crunchy element, as a texture element, as a conclusion. But think about chocolate, salt as an ingredient. It reduces bitterness, among other things. As a coffee person will know, often if you got an espresso that's too bitter, you can put a little salt in it or reduce the bitterness. It also opens up other flavors. So it's good to think about salt as an ingredient when you're doing it. But think about local ingredients. Is there a state dessert? I mean, um, the world's favorite dessert is tiramisu. So, it's got coffee and it's got other things in it. But if you're not doing something like that, are you leaving some money on the table? If you're not making something which appeals to a 5-year-old, right? So if you have a retail location and a parent walks in with a child or children in tow, and you don't have something, number one, that you can offer to sample for free to the child, because they can be very effective at getting parents to purchase things for them. But if you don't have something that is priced for a child, right, and is not um, the recipe is not aimed at a child, you're leaving money on the table, right? You need to do that. Think about local inspiration. What are other people? What is the favorite restaurant in the area? Do they have a favorite dessert? Can you collab with somebody about doing something like that? These are really, really important ideas to think about, right? You don't have to do this on your own. There's lots of other things, right? Just because, company X is doing this, you don't have to do that, right? And you need to focus on making sure that you have products that you can sell and that you have products that people want to buy and want to buy a lot of, and they want to buy often, right? And that revenue will enable everything else that you're doing, right? Taste your competition is a similar kind of way. I mean, Mike, as a coffee person, I'm sure you know this, but if you're, when I was in the spirits industry, we spent a lot of time in bars. Number one, promoting the spirit that we were making. It was called Sol Beso, and it was distilled from fresh cacao fruit juice. Spent a lot of time in bars tasting other companies' products, right? And cocktails made from other companies' products, right? If you're in the beer industry, you're constantly out there tasting other people's beers. If you're in the wine industry, you're out there, right? Not just selling your own wine, but tasting other people's wines. If you're in the chocolate business and you're not tasting other people's chocolate, right? Um, you're missing an opportunity, A, to train your palate, B, understand what you like, C, understand what other people are selling that they appear to be selling successfully. And you should be taking all of that learning back into what it is that you're doing, right? You need to taste your competition all the time. And sometimes literally taste the competition, which is go to the Northwest Chocolate Festival Chocolate Alliance list of award winners, right? And buy those, or go to the Academy of Chocolate award winners and buy those. If you're in a producing country, go to the AVPA awards list, and if you can, because they're often very difficult to find, purchase some of those. International Chocolate Awards, taste your competition, taste the competition, right? To understand, right, going back to the idea of we don't need another 70% two ingredient Meta Melange or Bajotho estate, right? Madagascar. If you taste seven others and you realize that you're doing something which is different from other people doing, that's something to consider, and that's something to explore, and that's something to talk about and market, right? But you don't know if what you're doing is different from, or how it's different from, and how it's better or not as good as what other people are doing. And you can try to go to online reviews. You can read the tasting notes that are on the bars or on the website. There is no substitute for tasting. And you should set aside time on a regular basis, if not weekly, then monthly, to give yourself the space and the opportunity to do that. And there's a corollary here that sort of combines think local number two and taste your competition, which is you should plan to take a month off every year. And you should plan to take a month off in towards the end of summer, right? So August in the Northern Hemisphere and December in the Southern Hemisphere. You should plan to take that time off. December, February, however that works, right? And you should give yourself the permission and the grace to go travel somewhere, right? And immerse yourself in a foreign food culture. If you want to go, for example, to Turin, in Italy, I mean, there's some great chocolate in Italy. There's some great in Turin. There's some great food in Turin. There's a fabulous market in Turin. Use that as a way, number one, of recharging your batteries. And number two is finding flavor inspiration for doing something. So the inspiration doesn't necessarily need to be what are the ingredients that are nearby. It can also be, I went to Italy. I went to the home of the Biccerin. I had tiramisu. I had all of these things that I discovered a love for marzipan or something like that. In between having some fabulous pizza and some fabulous pasta, understanding sort of the history of gianduja, which was created in that area. Just travel and make sure that one of the first places you travel is a producing country. preferably one you're buying beans from, right? If you're a chocolate maker and you've never been to a cacao farm and you've never actually gotten involved in the harvest and understand what it's like to, cut a pod from a tree safely and then open up, a pile of pods and then, pull out the seeds off the placenta and, start fermentation and go through that process, um, you're missing a fundamental understanding of what it means to be a chocolate maker. Right. And so, my own experience is that I started selling chocolate professionally in 1998, 1999, working for a guy by the name of Pierre Chouard at Vintage Chocolates. He was the importer of Michel Cluzel and Demori at the time I started working with him. So this is 98, 99. And I was selling high-end chocolates, Demori and Cluzel, into high-end hotel, restaurant, catering kitchens, Michelin-starred restaurants in New York City, right? But I'd never been to a farm. And it wasn't until 2003, right, that I went to Ecuador and had an opportunity to go to my first cacao farm. I felt to some extent like a fraud. Here I am talking about all these things, and all of my understanding about what cacao farming is about was from what I'd read. And right, I'd read a lot, but there is no substitute for that personal experience doing it. And one of the things that you can do that is that when you talk to your customers about this, right, you can talk from a place of personal understanding, right? And they will understand that you're talking from a place of personal understanding because you've been there. Hopefully you've got a photograph of you in these places and they can see that you're actually talking from personal experience. Really, really important that you plan this into your budget and you plan this into your schedule, because if you don't plan it into your budget and you don't plan it into your schedule, likely it's not going to happen, right? Because starting up a small business for the first couple of years is run, 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 run. Now, I got to say, what's my personal experience with that is that I went back to Ecuador in 2005. Again, this was with Pierre Chouard and his University of Chocolate out of Vintage Chocolates before it became Vintage Plantation Chocolate. And on the trip in 2005, I had a chance to meet with Sean Eskenazi, which is a name that many of you will most likely know. And then Sean was thinking about starting a chocolate business. He wanted to get out of the lawyering business. He wanted to do something else entirely. And he realized, right, that he needed to go to a producing country and get some firsthand experience before he actually started selling chocolate, before he started making chocolate commercially and selling chocolate, right? And he invited me on his first bean buying trips. This is to Chiapas, so the Pacific Coast, Soconusco region of Mexico, and then into the state of Miranda, Barlovento, Rio Chico, Caronero, in Venezuela. He did all of those things, right, before he started producing chocolate for sale, right? And I think that it made him fundamentally a better chocolate maker because he had an understanding of what it meant to be a cocoa farmer. How much work does it take, right? When he started his negotiations around buying beans, he was doing it face to face, eye to eye. He didn't speak Spanish. He had an interpreter that he trusted to do the work, but he was sitting there in the patios of these cacao farmer associations, negotiating for their beans before he started actually producing his first commercial bar and for sale, right? And there's a lot about that experience that informed the way he interacts with the cooperatives that he works at in the Philippines and Davao, and with the ones in Tanzania. So give yourself the opportunity, build it into your budget, build it into your schedule, give yourself the grace, permission to be able to travel, recharge your batteries, and learn, right? If I think about, all the really, really successful brands that I can think of, most of them have this component. If not as a part of their pre-launch strategy, as a part of their early strategy, building it into their marketing program. I mean, it's huge, really, really important. Okay. which is why I'm spending so much time with it. So I just want to do a quick reset. We're already halfway through the hour. I want to say hello to everybody. My name's Clay. We're here at PodSaveChocolate. We're talking about starting a craft chocolate business, top tips for doing that here on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If you're watching, go into the comments. So it's the live chat on YouTube, or it is the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, and ask a question or give me a quick shout out. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I'll get the question up on screen. I can't believe that nobody has a question about any of this stuff yet, but we'll get it up on the screen. We'll get it asked and answered. And I'm, happy to go a few minutes late. I do have a hard stop just after the call, but I can go a little long today without a problem. All right. Next one from a top tip, right? Your number one cost as a line item is labor. Hands down. You could go from paying $5 a kilo of beans to $7 a kilo beans landed, right? And not meaningfully affect the total cost of goods, right? Which is your entire cost before you start adding gross margin. And you think about how much money, what do I need to sell the bar for in order to be profitable, or the product for in order to be profitable? Labor is your number one cost, right? You need to understand how much time you are spending doing everything, right? And you need to account for it properly, right? So if you want to scale your business, yeah, I could go from a 20-pound melanger, tabletop melanger, to a 50-pound floor standing melanger, right? But what does that mean for the amount of time it takes you to actually do everything around that, right? How long are you spending cleaning the beans and sorting through them, right? You also need to keep track of the waste. So what is the weight, right? Before I start cleaning, what is the weight after I start cleaning? And then you need to understand, how does that ratio affect the cost of the beans? So if I've got beans for $5 a kilo and there's 20% waste, guess what? My beans cost me $6 a kilo, right? So really, really important to do that. And then you run it through, then you weigh again and you put it through the roaster, and there's going to be a 6 to 7% moisture loss. Okay, we need to understand what that moisture loss is. And you don't necessarily need to weigh it there, but you definitely need to weigh it after cracking and winnowing. So I put X number of beans in to the roaster and I get X amount of nibs out, right? Because you're actually making chocolate from nibs, and you need to know how much your nibs cost. And part of that is, how much time are you sitting there tending the roaster, watching it? How much time are you spending cleaning the beans, getting rid of all the trash that might be in the beans? How much time are you spending cracking and winnowing to get nibs at the end? You need to understand how much that is, and then be able to say, well, if I'm paying myself minimum wage, right, unburdened, I'm just paying myself minimum wage, somewhere between $7.25 and $15 an hour, depending on what state you're in, right? Not good enough. You need to charge yourself burdened. So if I was paying all my taxes, right, associated with wages, right? So I'm paying FICA, I'm paying all sorts of other withholding, all that other kind of stuff. You need to figure out what it's actually costing you. Again, you may not pay yourself that money, but you need to know how much it would cost if you did it, right? Your highest cost is labor. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to be very, very careful about thinking about what you can and can't afford to spend, which goes into the next point about equipment, right? You need to really understand, at what point does it make sense to invest in equipment, right? So even if you're spending not a whole lot of money on an inexpensive cocoa bean cleaner that you got on Alibaba, right? That you need to fiddle with in order to get it to work properly, right? Even if you're spending a couple $1,000 on that, you need to say, well, if this saves me 4 hours per bag in terms of cleaning time, and I've known people who spend that time cleaning their beans, how quickly does it take to pay that back? And and if I can now clean in 30 minutes rather than 4 hours, what am I doing with that 3.5 hours that is actually making me money, right? Rather than costing me money. You need to understand your labor costs, and you need to understand how investing in equipment is really all about reducing labor costs. And labor cost has this direct cost. I used to be spending $80 to do this task, and now I'm spending $10 to do this task. Yeah, I know that I needed to invest $3,000 in order to get there. But now what it is that I have, there's a lost opportunity cost. What could I be doing with the 3.5 hours, right? That I've now saved myself, right? What can I be doing with those 3.5 hours to actually doing something that I can sell and make money with? So you need to understand that business costs, the labor costs, are related to the way you think about equipment, right? So um, one of the saddest circumstances that I find myself in as a consultant, and I make my living mostly as a consultant, um, is somebody who comes to me and says, "I have a budget for X for this piece of equipment. I have $10,000 to spend on a tempering machine. That's it. I only have $10,000 to spend on a tempering machine because that's what I've budgeted." And they come to me and they say, "Well, I want to produce X number of bars every day. Each one of the bars is going to weigh this amount. And I've got this number of recipes." And you look at them and you say, well, the piece of equipment that you actually need is going to cost you $14,000. You're not going to be able to do what you want for your $10,000 budget. And they go, "Nope, I only have $10,000 to spend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy the machine that I can afford rather than buy the machine I need." And I have to tell you that that is a recipe for disaster, because you are never going to be able to make up for the time you're losing, or the fact that it doesn't have a feature that you need or an accessory that would make your life easy. So for example, I'm using this example because I'm extremely familiar with the equipment. So, FBM makes a 10-kilo working bowl machine, the Prima, right? But I think that it's too small to put a depositing head on. But it's not that expensive. And maybe you can get an Aura, which is a 4-kilo, but you can't put a depositing head on it easily, right? And so you may only have that budget to buy that machine, but when it comes to productivity and throughput, right, you need to consider those things. If you're constrained by your budget, wait until you can afford it, right? Figure out a way to do what it is that you're doing now. Wait to afford it, or find a way to get it financed for you, right? That do not buy equipment based on what you've budgeted and what you think you can afford. Buy the equipment that you absolutely need in order to be able to get your job done. And sometimes this is counterintuitive in terms of the approach. For example, do I go from one melanger at 50 pounds to two melangers at 50 pounds? Well, you've doubled your capacity, but what you haven't done is you haven't actually reduced the amount of time it takes to produce that amount of chocolate. So could you go and get, I've got a 50-pound melanger, but then I have a dedicated conch. And so what I can do, I spent about the same amount of money, right? But what I can do is I can do the conching that I need to do in 8 to 10 hours rather than 2 days. And so now what I can do is I can get more production, right, for the same budget, right? So you need to really think about time, productivity, throughput, all of those kinds of the capacity, right? And make sure that you're considering the labor, as well as this is what I need to have to grow, not this is what I can afford right now, right? I had a call earlier this morning, and I think I'm going to run into some of those budget issues with this particular client. I'm hoping not, but I hope that we can resolve them. Then what we'll do is we'll get the equipment that they need for the budget they have, not just the equipment that they afford. So, okay, really important to understand those relationships. If you can't say it, can't say it often enough. You buy the equipment you can afford, right, and not the equipment you need, right, you're setting yourself up for failure. right? And my experience is that the vast majority of startup craft chocolate businesses are undercapitalized from the beginning, right? So one of the great things that has happened, so probably the most influential person in this entire aspect or this entire universe, right? With respect to this is John Nancy at Chocolate Alchemy, in terms of pioneering using small equipment that came from kitchens for the most part, apart from tempering, right? Right. So the Champion grinder, the Champion juicer, and the little small wet grinders that are used for creating idli paste and things like that. That's John pioneered that. And so what he did is he said, well, if I wanted to start a chocolate business, I'm John Scharfenberger, and Robert Steinberg, they invested millions in their first factory in Berkeley. But now you could start a chocolate business for $10,000 in equipment investment, right? What that has done is it said I can start a chocolate business for not much money, right? Without really understanding the entire business exercise of saying, well, yeah, I can buy the 10 premier grinders, each one of which is 8 pounds, and I'm sure the guys at melangers.com would love you to do that. But it turns out that that's not an effective way of scaling up your business. It's not a good way of starting business. It may be what you can afford, right? But buy one for lab work, for recipe development, and then think about what you actually need to be a profitable business, right? And if it's going to cost you an extra 1,000 or an extra 2,000, wait until you have the money, find the money somehow, right? Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure. Next point, advice and counsel number one, right? Seek outside guidance on a couple areas, number one, especially. Number one is packaging. Seek outside guidance on packaging. Talk to somebody who is an expert in packaging. And even if you have to pay them, right, get them to help you. In the long run, it will save you, money, and you'll have more effective, more usable packaging from the very beginning, right? So talk to people who understand it. It could be a printing broker, right? There are a number of very good ones. If anybody is interested, I can introduce you to a colleague of mine who I think does a very good job there. And the other one is seek outside guidance about the chocolate that you make. Number one is, if I were to go and go back to the original poster here, there's another comment that is made actually over on Reddit in r/chocolate about this, where he says, "Ooh, I give my chocolate to all of these coffee guys, and they say it's the best chocolate in the world." Right? Everybody says that, right? Or they don't like it at all, right? So don't take it personally, right? There is something about having a freshly made chocolate, which is a day out of a melanger, right? Which is tempered, but it hasn't fully crystallized. That has a certain mouthfeel to it, which people find unusual, right? You need to get feedback on the chocolate that you make, not from friends and family. You need to get it from your feedback on the chocolate from people who are actually part of their job is to evaluate chocolate. Now, the Craft Chocolate Challenge that I just got done judging is an example of that. There's no cost to enter, right? Which makes it interesting. And the focus is on feedback, right? So it's not about giving a lot of awards. There are only 3 per category and 4 categories, right? So, it's not about giving lots and lots and lots and lots of awards, right? It's about giving feedback. I mean, it took me 3 weeks almost to judge 67 bars. Fortunately, I had that time because I was spending as much as 30 minutes, right? Considering a bar, considering its packaging, considering the mold, the way the mold look, thinking about the taste, right? What was the flavor journey that was going through? How am I providing feedback that will go back to the chocolate maker, right? And make them a better chocolate maker, produce tastier chocolate that more people are going to want to eat, right? You need to get that kind of advice. Now, the Craft Chocolate Challenge is one example, the International Chocolate Awards, the Academy of Chocolate, the Good Food Awards, the Northwest Chocolate Festival. These are all awards competitions that you can enter. Or what you can do is you can engage with a group of people that you can find on the internet who who review chocolate bars, right? Who are professionals, and this is their job, right? And ask them for their opinions, right? How would you compare this with other bars of the same style? How would you pair this with bars from other origin? Would you recommend things that I should taste that I can learn from in order to do this? All this kind of stuff, right? You need to be able to do. And I would just want to be a real, um, give a real quick shout out to Mike at Encore, and be humble when you get that feedback. You know, yeah, right. So one of the reasons why I think it's important to go and get professional feedback um, for doing this is, number one, is the people will tell you what they really think, not what they think you want to hear, right? Which is really, your family's not going to, for the most part, not going to tell you you make shite, right? um, but you've asked them to provide you feedback that's going to make you better, right? And you need to understand that constructive, really important, constructive criticism of your work is not criticism of you as a person, right? They may say, you know what, this chocolate doesn't work for me, right? Or I don't like it, or I think, I had to spit it out, right? What they're doing is they're giving you their impression of the chocolate, They're not giving their impression for you. Now, I went to art school, right? I, went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm sitting in critique, right? And I'm hanging up my photographs for the week in front of not only my professor, right, but the other students. And it's hard not to feel wounded when somebody looks at that and goes, that's garbage, right? It's hard not to feel wounded, right? But you need to understand that, unless somebody is being an absolute dick about this, and that's one of the reasons why you need to be careful about just going to the internet to get stuff done. Unless people are being an absolute dick about it, um, they're just trolling, right? To get responses. You need to understand that these people are out there genuinely trying to help you, right? You need to go and do that work. It's a part of learning to be a chocolate maker, is to be able to accept criticism, right? And not, well, you're wrong, right? Because this is great, right? Even if you win an award, let's say you get a gold, right, at the Americas round of the International Chocolate Awards, and you send it to the world round and you don't even place, same bar, different competition, right? Different judges. They'll have different ideas about what is good, right? It's not failure, right? It's an opportunity to learn, right? It's really important that we do this. Remember, it's just chocolate, right? It's just chocolate. It's designed to make people happy. Let's focus on making people happy, right? Not being jerks around what it is you're doing. And it's, one of the challenges with being a judge in the Craft Chocolate Challenge, because the focus is to providing constructive feedback, right? And then on top of providing an overall tasting evaluation, right? But it's the process that I go through to get to my score, which is as important to the chocolate maker, more important to the chocolate maker, arguably, than the score itself, right? So just think about that. Get advice, right? Right. And get it regularly, and get it from people you don't know, right? And don't just rely on your friends, and don't just rely on yourself. Just because you like it doesn't mean that it's going to be popular just because you like it. There have been some amazingly talented chocolate makers who didn't understand this lesson. They only made chocolate for themselves, right? And they didn't make enough chocolate, and enough chocolate that other people wanted to buy, for them to be able to stay in business. Really important to understand that. The advice and counsel, number two, I'm going to skip for right now, and I'm going to make it the last one, right? The final one is choose your market position carefully, right? And this is coffee people out there. Number one, right? So if there are coffee people in the audience, I want to let you know about that, because you'll get this, I think, very much so. The term bean to bar chocolate was coined in 1996, 1997 by Scharfenberger chocolate maker, right? And they called it that because they wanted to differentiate it from what they thought industrial chocolate makers were doing at the time. The challenge with bean to bar two. Number one is there is no single accepted definition of what bean to bar means. Just isn't. Right? It's not like I can say bean to bar and we know what it means. And Big Chocolate has picked up on that because now you have some of the largest chocolate makers in the world. Ghirardelli is owned by Lindt, so that combination is one of the larger ones in the world. And Ghirardelli is putting on the front of the labels of some of their bars, proudly bean to bar, our commitment to ultimate quality. And it's right. They're taking beans and they're transforming them into bars. They're a bean to bar chocolate maker. And so we within the industry, we think we have an idea about what bean to bar means, but the average consumer walks into their local drugstore, sees an end cap, Lindt owned Ghirardelli, that's why you see both of them on the end cap in a lot of drugstores. And they see bean to bar and they go, wow, this is $3 a bar, or $4 a bar, how come somebody charged me $14 a bar for what appears to be the same thing? So bean to bar isn't useful, right? People are confused about what craft is. What is craft? What is artisan? Well, how do we define craft? Is it how much chocolate that I make? There's some people who say, well, if you make more than 3 tons a year, you can't be a craft chocolate maker, and that has nothing to do with it. So what I want to do is I want to propose, right, that you think very careful. I am a specialty chocolate maker. And what makes me a specialty chocolate maker is I use specialty cocoa beans. And a specialty cocoa bean, one way to think about it is it's not bulk and commodity cocoa. So it roughly, right, differentiates the Robusta or Arabica, right, in coffee, right? But it also talks about here is a bean and it has a specialty fermentation. It could be a Forastero, it's got a specialty fermentation, or it is organically certified or biodynamically certified. Specialty cocoa is any cocoa that has something which is special about it, right? It could be an Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund designated cocoa, right? It could be a Forastero from Ghana, but it's got an HCP designation or Cacao of Excellence designation. It's a specialty cocoa. Right? And so think of yourself as a specialty chocolate maker. What makes my chocolate different from Lindt and Ghirardelli and everything you can find in the drugstore is that I'm using beans that are special, right? And that's why I think about, that's why I say choose your market position carefully. You need to be clear about what that position is, right? You need to be consistent in your marketing, the way you use it in your language. And then you also need to be unambiguous, right? And that's why I think that the entire craft chocolate world should move away from bean to bar into specialty, right? So craft is another thing. So an industrial chocolate maker starts off with the end goal in mind. Oh, my customers are expecting my chocolate to taste like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the beans that I get and other ingredients, and I'm going to adjust everything so that the end goal, the product that I make, is always the same, right? That is the definition. It is the hallmark of industrial products, repeatability and consistency, right? And that's what your customers expect. Craft chocolate maker says, ooh, I have some beans. I wonder what kind of fun flavors I can coax out of these beans, right? And so fundamentally, it is intent, in my opinion. That is the difference between a craft chocolate maker and an industrial chocolate maker. Nothing about equipment, nothing about size, nothing about batch size, nothing about how many beans per year I'm using. It's about intent. So embrace that notion. I'm a specialty chocolate maker because I use special beans, right? And my craft is to take the potential which is in those beans, the flavor potential in those beans, which I uniquely recognize, and through my artistic lens as a chocolate maker are going to transform into this wonderfully tasty chocolate, right? I mean, for me, that's a compelling argument about why I want to buy your stuff, not, right? Any one of 1,000 other arguments that gets made. This is bean to bar, which, whatever, right? Right. And the reason why I say this is advice and counsel number 2, right? Which is anything is worth what you don't pay for it. So free advice is worth nothing. I've spent most of the last hour giving free advice. And one of the challenges is if you're a startup chocolate maker and you go to the internet, you go to Reddit, you go to Facebook, you go to wherever it is that you're going to get advice, is you don't have the experience in the background to be able to say this is good advice or this is bad advice. And so you run the risk of unknowingly or unwittingly following bad advice, which is going to involve spending money and losing time, right? So you spent hours and hours and hours. Excuse me, there's a cost associated with that, direct in terms of your cost of labor, indirect in terms of lost opportunity. What could I have been doing that I was doing, right? And at the end of this, it's a pitch for somebody like me, right? Or that if you're going, which is, I got 20 years of talking about this stuff and thinking about stuff, right? And people come to me and ask for my help, and I give it to them, and hopefully the help that I give is worth what they pay for it. And I've helped a number of interesting companies that right? But if you're going to go online and you're going to go ask for help and information, go to a forum where there are people like you, right? People who have either been a startup craft chocolate maker, right? Right? Or are in the middle of starting up a business and figuring out from them what they've known. Because number one is the range of responses that they're going to give are going to be narrower. There's more likely to be a consensus, right, around what the right approach is going to be, right? So, ironically, again, at the end of the hour, right, free advice is worth what you don't pay for it. And think about that, right? And it feeds into this, what I think is a really, really unhappy feedback loop. Excuse me. There's something unusual here that might be causing a slight allergic reaction. Anyway, feedback loop around money, right? So as I pointed out, startup chocolate makers, craft chocolate makers have a tendency to be chronically underfunded. And so one of the things they tend to do is they tend to go to the internet and crowdsource the answers to some of their questions. And sometimes that free advice can get very, very expensive. Like expensive advice can get very, very expensive. And I got to say, well, if you want an hour of my consulting time, the cheapest way to do it is to become a premium member of the Chocolate Life, which is a segue to say this episode and every episode of PodSaveChocolate is sponsored by members of the Chocolate Life. This is the homepage right now. I'm logged in. Click this green button and it'll say join, and you can be a member of the Chocolate Life. There's always a free tier. Right. So I understand that not everybody has the financial resources to be able to support what it is that's going on here. But if you do, all right, most of the levels of membership include consulting advice. And you've got a small taste. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at your specific situation, right? Your budget, what it is that you want to achieve, work through and help you. How am I going to help you define what success is? How am I going to help you define what product mix to make? How am I going to help you define all of these kinds of things, tools that will help you understand what your cost of production is. All of those things are things that I do. And it can be very helpful. And that's it for the end. Last one. So this is an anonymous LinkedIn user, and I don't understand. I mean, sometimes LinkedIn will let me know who is connected, and sometimes it won't. In my world, the tea world, specialty tea has been used to differentiate between quantity and everybody else. There's a lot of discussion about what specialty means, but it brings awareness to the complexity of the industry. I agree. When I think about specialty coffee, I mean, there's a specialty coffee association, and they have a specialty coffee wheel, right? And so all of the flavor discussions are around the wheel, and there is Q grading courses, and these are recognized. So there's a discipline and a professionalization, which is really important around this whole notion of specialty coffee, right? And tea comes from a very different tradition, I understand. But when we talk about specialty tea, we can say a specialty tea is, any tea that is not commodity. It has something special about the way it is harvested, where it comes from, the genetics, right? The processing. So here's just a commodity oolong, and it's done this way, but here is a red lake moon in Taiwan. I mean, I had some really interesting tea chocolates made with phenomenal tea from Taiwan as part of this judging. But we can talk about it in a way. And I think that while professionals can argue the nuances of this, I think that what people understand about, I walk into a specialty coffee shop and a specialty coffee roaster, the average consumer understands exactly what it is you're talking about. Whereas bean to bar has to be explained. It's special, right? You want to have a conversation about what makes my stuff special. Let's have that conversation, right? And I think it makes more sense to have that conversation around what makes my stuff special than it is about saying, well, why is your stuff bean to bar and Ghirardelli is also bean to bar? What makes your stuff different or better from Ghirardelli? That's not a conversation you want to be having, right? In my opinion, right? You're talking about the wrong things there. You want to be able to go and have that somewhere else, right? And that's the last question, but it's a great question. It's a great question, specialty. I think that one of the challenges with craft beer, right, is that the word craft when it comes to beer has been bastardized. I mean, craft beer means, what is craft? The definition of craft beer. You can't have more than 40% ownership by a big company, and you have to be making less than 600,000 barrels a year. I mean, it is a definition for what craft beer is, but it seems like completely arbitrary because it doesn't talk about intent, which is what I say. If I have a specialty coffee, it talks about the intent. I mean, the goal of a specialty coffee roaster or a specialty coffee brand is to take coffee, special coffee, genetics, processing, origin, whatever it is, right, and create something that tastes fabulous to drink. And for tea, it's the same thing, right? And we don't talk about that with craft beer. We don't. Well, we use craft to mean different things. And what's specialty beer? Not a thing. Specialty wine? Not a thing. Specialty spirits? Not used the same way, right? So I think that by the chocolate world, the craft chocolate world, adopting the word specialty, right, and intent around the word craft is one of the things that what we do that makes us special, right? If we can. So special beans, special process, right? Special chocolate. Yay. Good all around. Something to consider about. Couple of comments. Mike at Encore Coffee. I agree with specialty. I define myself as a specialty coffee and chocolate, but I explain my manufacturing process is bean to bar. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, bean to bar is descriptive. I transform beans into bars. That makes sense. What you're not saying is bean to bar means it's ethically sourced, or bean to bar means it's direct traded, or bean to bar means that, all of these other things that have nothing to do with I take beans and I transform them into bars. You could be a bean to cup coffee shop. We have beans, right? We roast them in-house, right? We do the grinding in-house and we create cups. Bean to cup, that makes sense because it describes your manufacturing process, right? In which case it would be green bean to bar, but makes an enormous amount of sense. But Mike, you get the connection here and why I think it makes sense, especially for anybody who comes from the coffee world, who's going into the chocolate world, to be able to adopt that language, because your customers already understand what that means, right? And so there are a whole lot of discussions you don't need to have, but really, really important idea. Bean to bar is what I do, right? But it's not why I do it, right? And those are different discussions, right? And important. So I'm a specialty chocolate maker. My identity is as a specialty chocolate maker. Oh, right. My process is I buy beans and I transform them into bars, and bean to bar is shorthand for that. But it's not, bean to bar is different from big chocolate. It's not, bean to bar is different from industrial chocolate, right? Really, really important distinction. And thanks for pointing out that nuance. And then finally, again, it gives you the opportunity to explain the handcrafted nature of your manufacturing process. Absolutely. Let's engage the conversation around what do we mean when we use specialty, right? Specialty, I buy specialty beans, right? My goal as a craft chocolate maker is to take these specialty beans and make special chocolate, right? And here is the process of transforming the beans I get into the bars you're buying from me. I mean, it makes an enormous amount of sense, Mike. I visited your place. In Kansas City, outside Kansas City. And I've seen how close people can get to the equipment that you use and see the process. And this ability to make that connection is really, really important. And you can also make that connection whether you're in your shop and people have come to you, or whether or not you're going out and you're selling at a farmer's market. It also makes it easier. So, for example, if I'm a craft chocolate maker or a specialty chocolate maker, and I have a relationship with a specialty coffee house, and what I'm doing is I'm using their coffee to make a chocolate that they can sell for them. It actually makes it really, really easy for them to be able. They understand, right, the ethos of what it is that you're doing, and it makes it easier for them to sell not only themselves but yourselves as a chocolate maker and the joint collaboration with the coffee and the chocolate. If I'm doing this with an outside company, and I'm not doing both at the same time. But yeah, so hopefully, right, this episode on starting a craft chocolate business, top tips, has been interesting. If it is, like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, PodSaveChocolate. Go over to the Chocolate Life if you're not a member and become a member. Remember, right, at higher levels of premium membership, consulting becomes a part of it. And today is Good Friday, right? So just wanted to mention that. This coming Monday is Easter Monday. I will be back on Tuesday with an episode of Pod Save Chocolate. And then a week from today, I am going to be driving to Albuquerque for the Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Fest. So there will be no episode of Pod Save Chocolate a week from today. But when I get back from Albuquerque, we've got an episode of Pod Save Chocolate with Dustin Cornett, who's the founder of the Craft Chocolate Challenge, and we're going to be announcing the winners of the 2024 Craft Chocolate Challenge live. Hopefully, if you're a winner, you're going to be able to join us live during that episode, and we can talk about what it is you're doing. And with that, everybody, listen, have a great weekend. And remember, if you're working with chocolate, you know what? Where's my cursor? There it is. If you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.